Welcome back to another episode of our CARS Reading Skills Workshop as part of our Jack Westin MCAT Podcast. Also, Jack, happy New Year's Eve.
Same. Yeah, I can't believe 2025 is over. It literally just flew by.
I know. Can you believe? I think we've been doing our CARS Reading Skills Workshop for like 8 months now or something like that.
Insane. It
Yeah.
feels like yesterday.
I
So,
know. I know. I feel like to people that truly enjoy cars, it feels like it all goes by so quickly.
right.
Oh my gosh. Well, to anyone who's brand new to our Cars Reading Skills Workshop, as you now know, you have months of episodes that are at your fingertips to review. But in an episode like this or in a podcast like this, basically our goal is to go through our Jack Westin Cars daily passages and basically just talk about what we should be learning from the author every time we read a Cars sentence. So we're going to be talking about how to sift through the noise, how to identify the most important sentences within the passage, and move past the things that are insanely dense and terrifying, and talk about how to deal with those sorts of feelings when you're reading through a Cars passage. And maybe Cars has been something that we didn't love in 2025, but you know what? It's New Year's Eve. Let's all make a collective New Year's resolution to
Right.
approach Cars differently, right? Maybe in a way that's less self defeating, and maybe more open to what we call the growth mindset. It can be a strong section for anyone, right? It's not a session that or section that relies on having a perfect science GPA or, being a literature major. Anyone who's really dedicated, and Jack, you always say, high school level understanding of English
Yeah,
with strong critical thinking skills, you could be successful in this
right.
session.
Right. What better way to start our new year than to read a passage on standardized tests?
I
Right.
know. It's so funny. It's so on the nose. Oh my gosh, it's perfect. But yes, this passage that we're going to go over in this episode, it's called Standardized Tests. Perfect, right? It's the Jack Weston Daily Passage from December 31st. As always, if you're not listening to this on New Year's Eve, if on New Year's Eve you're out and enjoying time with friends and family, hooray! I hope you have a wonderful day. If you're listening to this later, you can always check out the link in the description and it'll take you right to this passage. So you don't have to be listening to it on the day it was posted. But we always recommend that you take a look at the passage first, just to kind of see what your instincts are when you read it, so that when we're talking about it, you kind of know what to compare this against, right? If you were really scared by a sentence, that allows you to kind of perk up when we're talking about how to deal with that one. Or if you found this, maybe you thought an entirely different sentence was important than we did, right? It's kind of priming you to evaluate what we're saying on a more critical level. So we hope you read it ahead of time. If not, we're going to go ahead and hop in. So let's start with our first sentence. It says standardized tests have long been used to ascertain learner progress in the US or in the US. We've got abbreviations right after that. So I thought it was a continuous sentence. Um, okay, so pretty straightforward. We're saying standardized tests are used and have been used for a while in the US to assess learning, right?
Right. I mean, that's something everyone is very familiar with. And we all know that the MCAT is probably one of the most difficult standardized tests out there.
Yeah,
So great. At least we're learning about maybe some idea of how the MCAT works in this passage, right?
totally.
Okay, great. So I mean, this is a typical argument that we can make about standardized tests that they've been used to help with understanding how much a learner has progressed, right? Maybe that's not true, right? This is an opinion. Sometimes standardized tests do not give us an idea of how much a learner has progressed. But in the eyes of at least the authors, right? Like this is something that has been happening, right? That this is how people view standardized tests.
Yes. And I know even hearing that and saying that, a lot of people are like, "No, MCAT doesn't test how smart I am." Like it's trying its best. But let's see how the author feels more about standardized tests. So, E.L. Thorndike, 1874 to 1949, was a pioneer in developing standardized tests at the beginning of the 20th century. Cool. So we actually learn a little bit about Thorndike in Psych Soc. Don't think about that. Okay. Take what they're saying. Thorndike is associated with standardized tests. That's it. Okay. It's not really an argument necessarily. It's helping us understand the history of standardized tests as we established in the first sentence. So it's just giving us someone to associate with this.
So we know who we can curse every time we mess up on a CARS passage.
Yeah,
Okay, just kidding.
totally.
All right, great.
Okay. He believed that whatever existed, such as academic achievement, existed in some amount. Okay. Kind of a weird way to phrase that, but you can maybe quantify it like there's an amount of achievement. Anything that exists in some amount. Kind of odd, but that's basically we're saying if it exists, it exists in an amount.
Well, at least they're telling us what is existing. Academic achievement is something that could exist. So we can, I guess, there's some sort of amount that there is to achievement.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's like quantifiable. It's something you could associate a number with, is
Yes.
kind of what my brain is saying.
Right.
And the next sentence kind of clarifies. It says, if it exists in some amount, it can be measured. So, really, if you exist, you can be measured. If you exist in some amount. If you exist in some amount, you can be measured. So, what is existing can be measured. And this is Thorndike's belief, according to
Right.
the author.
That's Thorndike's perspective, not the author's, right?
Yes.
So very important that we understand how Thorndike basically made up standardized tests, right? Oh, academic achievement can be quantified. Oh, well, let's measure it. Let's see how much you know, how much you have of that quantity,
Yes.
right? So okay, got it. That's the idea.
Yes. This line of thinking is quite opposite of what the skeptic Georgias in ancient Athens believed. Okay, so now we have a new person, a skeptic, right? Georgias. They believe the opposite of Thorndike. So, okay, I don't, like you pointed out, what we've described so far is Thorndike's belief. Now we get that this other individual has an opposite belief. I don't know what the author thinks
Right.
necessarily yet,
We
but
don't know yet. We don't know yet. Yeah. And why didn't Georgia's like survive long their ideas survive long enough so we don't have to see standardized tests? Right? But
yeah,
okay. All right. Interesting. Very
yeah.
interesting.
Okay, when standardized tests were developed, educators placed much faith in their results when measuring learner achievement. Okay, so we're using them, right? That's we've kind of established that in the first sentence that we use it to ascertain learner progress. We have faith in the results on how they ascertain learner progress, essentially. Um, it sounds like that's an idea that's definitely present, right? We at least at some point, right, when they were developed, we use standardized tests to assess learner achievement or learner progress.
Right.
That being
And that
said, we also have those Thorndike ideas.
right, right. So big ideas. I think there are a couple. One is standardized tests are popular, right? To test learner progress, not necessarily intelligence. There's a difference, right? Your intelligence can be measured in so many different ways. Progress in terms of what you learned, right? And then the other idea is that this thing that can exist, I guess, academic achievement can be measured, and that's Thorndike's idea.
Yes.
Okay, great. So we know exactly what's going on in this paragraph. Kind of set us up for, the debate, right? Is it actually something we can measure, right? That's probably, I hope, where we're going to go and talk about because I'm curious, right?
Yeah.
Does the MCAT actually tell us anything? Okay.
Yeah. Okay, let's look at P2. Standardized achievement tests and their use are one way to measure learner progress in academic areas. Okay, this is not tied with Thorndike. This is not tied with Georges. This is just a statement. It sounds like this is at least one way to do it. Okay, so it's seeming pretty cohesive with what we had said before, right? They're used to measure learner achievement. This is saying that it's one way to do that. I'm kind of sensing a dot 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 if we had said we have a lot of faith in it and now it's this is one way to do it. But I don't think that this is really a distinct argument so far. So I'm probably just going to keep reading and see how this develops. Nothing super new, nothing super notable, but it's at least helpful to feel like we're still kind of on the same page as what we were talking about previously. So, educators like to believe that objective results are likely when standardized tests are used to measure pupil achievement. Mm. Okay, so now we're bringing in this idea of objectivity. So, standardized tests help us be objective. That's an argument, right? Or at least educators like to believe. Even, I don't know about you, Jack, even that phrasing makes me think I don't really know if the author's buying it.
The author's distancing themselves, right?
Totally.
Oh, educators. Where's the author? Does the author not believe? This gives me a hint that the author, yeah, like you said, is not buying it, not agreeing to it, but we don't know for sure, right?
Yeah.
Maybe there's some parts to this they don't agree with. We can't be extreme. We can't assume, but it is noticeable, right,
Yeah.
that they have not claimed this idea for themselves.
Yeah. And they like to believe. Not even educators believe. Like that even is kind of casting doubt. Same thing with
Right.
the one way. I'm interested to see how this develops.
Isn't that crazy when you see that like to believe? It
Yeah.
kind of I don't know what's the word that can best describe how I feel, like what I sense when I see that, right?
Yeah.
Like it sounds like the author is sort of like in a way patronizing, maybe
Yeah.
maybe not that maybe that's a little bit
Condescending.
condescending is the better word. Yeah. Condescending what these educators believe, right?
Yeah.
Oh, you like to believe. Like it sounds like there's an attitude there. It's not that noticeable, but it's subtle. But
Yeah.
but like if you read it carefully, you see it, right?
Yes.
So cool.
Totally. Okay. However, so we're coming out of a sentence, right? Educators believe that standardized tests are objective. Okay. However, there is subjectivity and judgment involved when determining which items should go into the test. Okay. Very clear, right? The author gave us a contrast word, right? A however, and then we're saying, hey, it's subjective. There's subjectivity. The last sentence, educators like to believe that these are objective. However, there is subjectivity. Boom.
Right. That's
That's
why.
that seems like the author,
That's
right?
the author, and that's a contrast word, which you all know is very important. So great. Okay.
All right. Based on these subjective items used in pilot studies, as well as in measuring pupil progress, statisticians develop means, medians, modes, standard deviations, and quartile deviations, among other terms familiar to statistics, to describe learner achievement. So, I mean, I think for most of us, or for most people, this would not be very understandable. We actually learn a little bit about statistics for the MCAT, but again, not the point in CARS. You don't need to be thinking, oh, mean, that's average, mean. No, no, it doesn't matter. Okay. It sounds like we're using this data, this subjective data, we're using it. And maybe that's problematic if it's actually subjective. Um, but again, what we want to track as far as an argument, we believe as educators, standardized tests are objective, but they're not. They're subjective, or at least there is subjectivity involved. So it's not entirely objective.
Just giving us an idea of how it can be subjective. Even though they are applying statistics to it, it's still subjective. They're basically looking at things mathematically that are subjective. So I think the author has a problem with this, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
agreed. Okay, let's look at P3. P3 says validity and reliability are also brought in numerically to show objectivity in testing. Again, my psych soc alarm bells are going off because we talk about validity and reliability in psych soc research methods. And I know that some of us, when we see that, we're like, oh, I know what those are. No, you don't. Shh, it's fine. They'll tell you if they want you to know that. There's
Right.
no content for cars. So sometimes it's when things are a little more familiar, we need to be extra careful. Okay. It sounds like validity and reliability are supposed to show objectivity. Okay, we use them to show objectivity. I'm expecting, though, based on the paragraph before, maybe this is not objective, right? I know the author feels that these standardized tests have subjectivity, this might not be a statement that we stick with forever, right? We might have a contrast. We might come in and call this idea into question or weaken it a little bit based on the last paragraph, but we'll just have to keep reading and see.
Right.
Okay, these are hard to determine though, especially reliability. Another short sentence. Okay, so hard to determine. Reliability, particularly hard to determine. All right. Nothing super complex there. Um, Reliability involves the idea that the best students will get the most correct answers. Okay, so we have a definition, right? It's hard to determine reliability, and this means best students get the most correct answers. It's actually not how we normally define reliability in psych-soc, which is again why you don't pay attention to your content, you pay attention to what the author said. Okay, in some cases, two test creators may not agree on which answer is correct from four responses on a multiple choice test. I'm sure, I feel like this sentence in particular, Jack, this is like so hallmark of cars,
Right.
where people want to argue with the answer choices and say this is not true or this is
Oh my
not
God.
fair.
That's the story of everyone's life when
I
it comes
know.
to cars.
I know,
So,
for real.
okay.
Yeah. So okay, the test creators are basically being used to demonstrate that this is not objective. Even the people who write the test don't agree on the answers. That's kind of
That's
a
wild.
problem.
Diabolical.
I know.
Right.
Even the people who write it don't even agree on the answers. Like, how am I supposed to get the answer correct? Um, yeah, so that's
So
definitely showing some subjective elements in my head. If there's no objective right answer, even among test creators, I
the
don't know.
worst is when someone makes the test and someone makes the solutions for the test, right?
Uh-huh.
Because now you're like piecing the puzzle that doesn't even exist because you don't know how they came up with the solution, but like, or came up with the question to make a solution for it. So that's a dilemma of its own. But yeah.
Yes, for sure. I'm glad we have a content team that can collaborate on those things.
Yes, yes, exactly.
Yeah, it's hard to make a solution from somebody else's material. Um, but okay, so we get some element of like maybe this is not totally objective with the test writers here. An item on the test works the right way if the person responding correctly to a test item also has the largest number of items correct for the total test. Okay. So if you get some questions right, you should get a lot of questions right. That's basically describing how this test is supposed to be predictive. Okay. I mean, I don't think that we're going to get individual, like super narrow questions about exactly how these tests work. But again, what is this brought in to demonstrate? It's probably objectivity becoming actually subjectivity. Okay. Conversely, a test item should probably be eliminated if it works the wrong way. For example, the pupil secures a correct answer on a single test item and yet does poorly on the total test. So, this is called item discrimination. So, with that parenthetical item discrimination, anything in parentheses, anything italicized or put in quotes, it's probably a term the author wants us to know. Um, and so, I would want to just keep that in my mind. Item discrimination is basically I'm struggling with a particular question. Or in this case, I did well on a particular question, even if I was unprepared. Right. Again, this item discrimination is something is working the wrong way, which is kind of an argument in itself that there could be a right and wrong way. But again, it seems like the author's trying to use this to show, in quotes, objectivity. Maybe not so objective. Okay, test writers use this approach to secure a large range in test results, such as different pupils scoring all the way from the 99th to the first percentile on the same test. Okay, we all know this way too well, the percentile ranks of standardized tests. So it's just continuing to describe what standardized tests are looking like, and how validity and reliability are used to show objectivity, right? They're used to show objectivity, but they're also hard to determine and to sort of rely on. Um, in my eyes, that's what I'm getting from this. Jack, what do you think?
That's really it. I mean, they did go and expand about reliability, and some of it is confusing to understand,
Yeah.
especially like how like they eliminate things and decide what's correct, what's not. Ultimately, though, as long as you know that this is all surrounding how reliability is difficult to determine, I think you'll be okay.
Yeah.
Right. That's the big idea here is reliability is hard to determine. And they do kind of present an example like this whole item discrimination, test discrimination stuff. Um, Good to pay attention to and visualize, but ultimately we know why they bring this up. They bring this up because they want to prove to us, the author here, that reliability is difficult to achieve.
Yes. And this is not directly stated, but I feel like the way that this is phrased, especially coming from P2, we were talking about, hey, this is everyone thinks it's objective, but actually there's subjectivity. That was very direct.
Right.
Here we said, hey, these validity and reliability are used to show objectivity, but reliability is hard to even understand. It kind of feels like the author is still having this sort of skeptical tone about how objective really are these,
Right.
right? Like
Yeah.
they're
Yeah.
used to show objectivity, but they're hard to even determine. And so, how can you trust that it's objective? Maybe it's subjective, like we said in P2.
That's such a good point because to argue that this is a subjective thing, right? Standardized tests are very subjective, or have subjective elements. We should tackle how they try to make things objective, right? Validity and reliability should make things more objective. But the author is saying, look, even reliability is subjective, right? In many ways, right? It's hard to determine, it's hard to figure out. It's not saying it directly, but that's the vibe we can get. So for sure, love that.
Yeah. All right, let's look at P4. Validity has always been a problem in the use of standardized tests. Great. So we've got more problems. Okay. In this case, we just spent the whole last paragraph talking about reliability. Here, this one is probably going to be about validity. But it's also a problem. And I know that was part of what can be used to show objectivity. So guess what? Still an issue. Okay, so validity is a problem. Validity pertains to what a test can or can't ask. So again, we're defining validity. This is not normally what we think of with validity, but we're not bringing content here. You know what they tell you, and that's it. So basically, deciding what can and can't be asked about is a problem, okay, for standardized tests. Okay, how does a teacher prepare a student for those differences? I don't know. You ask me a question, author, I'm going to think about what my answer would be, and then I'm going to read yours. That's why, right? That's why they're asking us. They want us to start thinking so that when we hear their answer, we're like, oh, yeah, duh. Okay, so how does a teacher prepare for these differences? There are no objectives that are available for teachers to guide instruction. So, what is on the standardized test may not be related to what a teacher teaches. Okay, I feel like this is helping me really start to understand. I'm kind of again reading between the lines here, but there's no objectives to guide instruction. So standardized tests aren't related to what is going on in the classroom. Again, we made this claim in P1 that you could measure academic performance or learner progress or learner achievement with standardized tests. But we just said what's on standardized tests might not even be related to what's going on in the classroom. It feels like, again, and we don't like to make assumptions, but I'm picking up individual puzzle pieces, and I'm starting to feel like the author really does not believe that these are objective. Maybe they're not. They're not. No, I shouldn't say they're not fair. That's an assumption, but they are not. They're not objective. They are
Right.
subjective.
Right.
That is
Right.
fair to say.
Yeah, the author is tackling reliability and validity and at least defining it for us, right? And that these definitions may or may not be the definition that you've learned, right? But it's the author's definition and we have to stick to that.
Yeah,
So great. I mean, so far, big idea is, there's a problem with validity, right?
yeah,
There's a problem with reliability. That's consistent with the author's perspective. that standardized tests are subjective. Now, we haven't said that directly, but I feel like that's probably going to be the main idea, right?
Yes.
But let's keep going because maybe they do expand on validity or reliability and they make that more of a focus. But if I had to, I mean, there's nothing that's repeated so far. But if I had to pick one of these ideas, I'd say that one because it kind of encompasses these last two paragraphs.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It's not direct yet, but it feels like that's where we're going.
Right.
Okay, so let's see. We have one last paragraph, P5. The same problems plague the writing of criterion referenced tests, which are based on a curriculum. Okay, so we're introducing a new like subject, the criterion referenced tests. We're saying there's the same issue. So maybe, struggling with objectivity. These are based on a curriculum, so not it's not quite a standardized test, but maybe related. I don't know. I don't know what these things are, and hopefully they tell us. Um, but okay, we're switching test type, seems. Criterion reference tests do have high validity due to the fact that the predetermined objectives have been written prior to instruction, and each may be announced to learners before being emphasized in a lesson taught by the curriculum. Okay, so we're saying validity is high. Okay, and we're giving a reason because essentially it goes along with the curriculum. Okay, so high validity is something we want to associate with these criterion reference tests. That being said, you said it was the same problem, so maybe you have low reliability, right? I
Let's
It's high
see.
validity that we get. That made a decent amount of sense. Pupils then feel secure in knowing what is to be learned as a result of instruction. Okay, so they're familiar with it, right? It has to do with this high validity. They feel secure. They know what they're going to be tested on. All right. So we're very focused now on criterion reference tests. It probably is no wonder that pupils can do well on a CRT since what is taught is contained in the stated objectives and what is tested is also based directly on the stated objectives. Okay, I feel like we're just saying the same thing again and again. It seems like, we know what to expect, and that's really the idea. Again and again and again. That's what it means to have high validity. Okay. It's because it has a curriculum. Oops. Okay. The objectives, learning opportunities, and appraisal procedures are indeed carefully aligned. All right. Still same direction. Okay, since the behaviorally stated out or objectives are stated with precision so that little, if any, latitude exists pertaining to their interpretation, factual knowledge is taught rather than stressing higher levels of cognition, such as critical and creative thinking, as well as problem solving. Mm. Okay, so this is a little bit different, right? It's factual instead of critical thinking. This feels like the MCAT, right? Undergrad might be based on factual knowledge, but we know obviously the MCAT is very focused on critical and maybe not creative thinking, critical thinking for sure. This sentence is pretty hard to understand, okay, but it sounds like there's maybe some weaknesses to CRT, criterion reference tests, or some limitations maybe. And then even so, reliability remains an issue. Okay, so these CRT criterion related tests, high validity, but reliability is still a problem. So we can track those things. We had mentioned those earlier. Um, Human beings always determine which items go in the making of a test. So always is pretty extreme.
Yeah.
It sounds like we're talking about validity. I feel like this always is jumping out at me.
That
This
yeah, that sounds really extreme and very subjective, right? They are making the determination on what should be in the test. Does that sound like more like validity or reliability to you? To me,
I
that
think
sounds yeah.
no, you go for it.
I think it's validity,
Yeah.
right? Like we're choosing what matters. But then the previous sentence was about reliability. So it's like a repeat of what we've talked about. Reliability is an issue, validity is an issue, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And then we get the last sentence, which also feels repetitive from what we mentioned before. Test writing is therefore not purely objective. Boom,
That sounds like
right?
a thesis I would write, like at the end of the, like that's what you were taught, at the end of the paragraph, the last paragraph, write your summary thesis, right? And
Yeah,
so here it is, right? It's not objective, not purely objective, which means what? It's subjective.
objective.
Right.
Yeah.
And so that seems to be the theme and the main idea. But, they did mention reliability again. They did mention validity again and the problems associated with it. So it's not wrong to say, okay, yeah, the standardized testing has subjective elements. Reliability is faulty. Validity is faulty, right? Those are okay, consistent with what we've been talking about. But I think the subjective elements of standardized tests is really the main idea of this passage.
I agree. It's what we came back to multiple times, and even validity and reliability were kind of used to discuss whether test writing is really objective. So I
Right.
think, yeah, I think that that really is the main point here. And again,
Yeah, I
it's funny that we're talking about this while
yeah,
preparing for a standardized test.
right. Yeah, it's ironic, right? We're
Yeah.
preparing for a subjective exam, guys. But in reality, the author did actually cave in and say criterion reference tests do have high validity. I would keep track of that, right? That's an idea in this paragraph that I would keep track of. I would keep track of the idea that basically standardized tests have subjective elements, right? From the second paragraph, I think, right? I think that was where we initially talked about it.
Mhm.
So yeah, that those are the two big ideas. If they mention criterion reference test, they didn't have an issue with validity on that aspect, but they did it with reliability. So criterion tests have the high validity, but not the best reliability. Outside of that, though, the author still thinks that standardized tests are subjective.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, and even then, criterion reference tests might have a high validity, but they have a low reliability. So, like, even then, they might be slightly problematic. The author never was super direct and said, hey, these are fine. In fact, the first sentence of the last sentence or the last paragraph still says the same problems. But I mean, yeah, that would be very localized to the last paragraph. If we got questions about that, that's definitely where we would want to, where the part of our map that we would want to reference. Um, Sweet. So we have our main idea, right? That we have subjective elements in these standardized tests or that they're not purely objective. I think really that's all you need to get a pretty good score on this question
Yeah,
set.
yeah, yeah. That's it. I'm,
So,
I'm, I'm excited for students to jump in and do this set of questions. And again, focus on the big picture, big ideas of each paragraph, and also keep track of the names like Thorndike, right? What Thorndike believed, and well, also what the author believes with criterion referenced tests. So if you have all that in mind, you should be good to go.
yes, absolutely. So make sure to try the questions associated with this. It's great practice since you have a pretty, hopefully, strong understanding of the passage now. Um, we hope you enjoyed this episode of our CARS Reading Skills Workshop, and we hope to see you in the next one. In the meantime, Happy New Year, and let's get the MCAT score of our dreams here in 2026.
Yes, and maybe even an acceptance if you apply to medical school this year. So
Yes,
awesome, awesome. All
yes.
right.
All right. Thanks, guys. Bye.